All right, everybody, welcome to the Regional Climate Protection Authority's Climate Protection Initiative Buildings Committee. Everybody say it together with me 5 times fast. Thank you for joining us here on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. My name's Panama Bartholomew. I'm one of your co-chairs. Co-chair Ann Edminster is in Minnesota as we speak. Attending the Getting to Zero forum and spreading the good word about zero emission buildings over there. So she couldn't join us for today. What we're going to do is we need to do some introductions, see who's here, both from our CPA staff as well as those in attendance, and then we'll go over the agenda. So our CPA staff, would you mind introducing yourself, who's in the room, and then we'll go to Amy, Steve, and then Andy.
I'll go ahead and jump in.
Go ahead, BC.
Sure. I'll jump in first. My name is BC Capps. I'm with RCPA. I'm the Climate Change Program Specialist working underneath Tanya on this project.
And I'm Tanya Narath, the Director of Climate Programs for the RCPA. And Ross?
Ross Clendenin, RCPA, SCTA Communications.
Great. And then starting with Amy, who are you? What's your interests? And if you're representing an organization, what organization you're representing?
Okay, so I'm Amy Ashley. I own a solar roofing company, and so I guess you could say I'm representing Amy's Roofing and Solar. But I'm here just to see how I can be of assistance.
And I'm Steve Pierce. I help out with the Sebastopol City Climate Action Committee, their energy working group.
Thanks, Steve. Andy?
Hey, I'm Andy Schrader. I did environmental policy for one of the LA City Council members for the last 10 years, and now I live here and am quite interested in all the goings on around climate emergency, and we're working on a refrigeration pilot potentially for a grocery store, and wanted to talk about that in terms of this meeting.
Great, thank you, Andy. And Tom, who are you? What's your interest?
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I just met the new city manager in the city of Sonoma. That's where I live, and I'm active with Sierra Club, and I think I've heard of Andy Schrader in LA, so glad to see your face.
Great, wonderful. Well, let's go over the agenda. Hopefully you all have it. If anybody not have the agenda or need us to put it in the chat.
I can also share it very quickly if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Please put it in the chat. I need to search my emails to find it.
Yep. So we are going to have a report out from the April community meeting. There was a community meeting the RCPA hosted for the climate initiative, and we went over all the different working groups, buildings, as well as transportation and land and water, and gave a report out and allowed opportunity for feedback from the community and voting. So we're going to go over some report out from that meeting and have a discussion about those of you that were there, any reactions, check out the polls and the building stuff. And then want to continue the conversation about how to measure impact of the programs. And so as we get down to having to decide between different approaches for adaptation and mitigation, how should the RCPA board ultimately decide how any potential revenue would be spent between programs as well as between projects, and what are good ways to be able to analyze the impacts of different approaches that could help in decision making, as well as if we're able to pass this and get programs going, how to decide between projects and measure effectiveness of projects. And so we just wanted to have continuing conversation on measuring impacts of projects and programs. Then there'll be an opportunity to provide any kind of announcements or about any actions or events that are coming up. And then we'll adjourn till our next meeting. We're likely to take a break for a few months for the summer and come back in the fall for our next meeting. I'll let our CPA staff provide some more details on that as we get towards the adjournment. I just wanted to give you a heads up here at the start. So that's the agenda review. Any additional topics that anybody would like added to the agenda?
I just, maybe this is included under the April meeting, but to talk about the possible, what we want out of the questionnaire process that the county is going to be investing in. If there's anything that we need to get feedback from the public on.
Are you speaking about polling, Tom?
Yes, the poll.
Polling, okay. Great. Yeah, our CPA staff, would you be able to give an update at later in the agenda about the planned polling?
Sure. Yeah, you can do that.
Great. Thank you for that, Tom. Any other question? Any other things that anybody wants added to the agenda? All right, we'll get started then. So a report out from the April community meeting.
I can jump in here and provide a little bit of a background. And I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe most people on this call were able to participate. So we hosted a workshop, public workshop on April 19th. It was virtual only. We had approximately 110 viewers or participants through the course of the workshop. It was kicked off by Congressman Jared Huffman, gave an introductory remark. Suzanne Smith provided some background information. Each of the three committee chairs presented information on work that the committees have been doing. And then we had some quick polling, I'll say unscientific polling that we did there at the meeting. And we have some of those results that were included in the agenda packet. And I can easily bring back up in just a minute if we wanted to look over in some more depth. There were a number of questions that were asked using the Q&A function during the meeting, and we are currently working on compiling answers to all those and hope to post those up soon and get a kind of a distribution back out to all the attendees who attended that meeting. It's kind of the highlights from my point, and I think I should ask whether Tanya or Ross, if you have other kind of things you wanted to make sure to highlight from the evening.
Ross, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing major beyond that, just that we do still, if anyone is still interested in taking the poll, we have a version that is the same as what was offered during the meeting, but does have some open-ended question spaces. So people want to give a little more info, and we are still looking at that. So still available.
And Ross, do you anticipate closing that out fairly soon, or did we set an end date for that?
I believe so. As soon as the official polling starts, I think we should.
Yeah.
But I think in theory the next week or so. But we've had probably about 20 responses since the meeting. Yeah.
In my answers to the Q&A, I had actually written up that we would have the survey open for 1 month following the meeting. So if it's possible to run it through the 19th, that's next week, that would be great. We'd kind of meet that 30-day window.
Gotta do right by BC. Yep. Thank you for that, BC. And so if you scroll to the bottom of the agenda, everybody, you can see what some of the polling results were. So we wanted this to be a discussion item, an opportunity to talk about overall impressions and any feedback on how the event worked for you, those of you that went to it, any improvements for future community events, and also any comments on what you see in front of you, the polling results, any surprises you'd like to bring up. So if you'd like to mention anything, please raise your hand. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, Steve. Mr. Pierce.
We just have gotten our results back from our electrification survey, preliminary results in Sebastopol. And we had 515 responses. And what people seem to express most is confusion, and they wanted assistance with both technical and more kind of help me through the process assistance. So that those were two main themes. And then of course, the finance theme that people wanted money. But I think once people get educated on the money that is truly available, it seems to me that that whole issue of assistance rises to what people really are looking for to move to electrification. So I think it didn't poll all that well here, but from our more extensive polling on electrification, it did clearly rise. So just something to think about.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Any thoughts, any surprises? Tom?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting observation, at least interesting to me, that vehicle charging came out relatively unpopular in the ranking. I know here in the city of Sonoma, it's really one of the primary things that the city was thinking of doing. But again, back to BC's point about this being an unscientific survey, there's a little self-selection bias in these results. So I think, Steve, you were referring to the Sebastopol findings, because we didn't really ask people open-ended what their issues are. But I guess, is that in here? Assistance?
Yes, it's what is it? That's sixth one down, or
That's the ambassador program.
yeah, right. It's basically kind of what
Ambassador program.
the county is doing now. In fact, we're trying to refer as many people as possible to the county's climate action and resilience division. They're quite helpful.
Right. So, yeah, because again, this is going to be non-scientific, but just anecdotal. I'm going through an all electric rehab right now. Just drug a gas furnace up out of a basement. It was just a wonderful feeling. And the barriers around just the contractor asymmetric information barrier, the high prices. I think I may have mentioned this in the last call, but the city of Sonoma got a bid to replace the 3 heat pumps driving a small building, like $230,000, just a single building. And there's really discontinuities in the marketplace right now, and I'm not sure how we're going to address that, just little Sonoma County. But yeah, I'm sure customers are confused. We just did you can buy basically the same functional equipment off the shelf at Home Depot for $3,000. We got a quote to install them for 18, and the guy admitted it would take a day, maybe a day and a half. That's a residential, just run a couple of lines and get them set up. So that's a huge barrier, and I don't know that the incentives coming next year are going to just inflate those prices even more, or what's going to happen. So I don't. Those are the things I'm concerned about. And so it's technical assistance, but it's also kind of trustworthy, how do you find the contractor that's going to give you the confidence to move forward with the project? Because I've had a number of very dedicated people back out because they just couldn't see value in spending that kind of money at this time, even with incentives.
Others, any feedback? Amy, looks like you're about to speak.
Yeah, I have a comment. Just looking at, I mean, first of all, obviously I agree with all of these things should be done, but just looking at what people are generally like sort of upvoting, it looks like people, my assessment is that people are choosing things that are applicable to them. And it seems like as a committee that's working on this, like it would be our job, like just because something is good for like an individual doesn't mean that it's the most impactful thing that we can do. Like obviously we want like public support for whatever is going to happen, but people don't always know what's the big picture. Like that would be our job, or not mine necessarily, but maybe as part of this committee.
Yep. Good points, Amy. Any other feedback or discussion? How did folks feel about the format of the event? Any other comments about that? People still going to vote for Jared Huffman next time he comes up on the ballot? All right. I was encouraged to see what scored high, the extra assistance for low-income households, renters, and landlords. I think that, part of the danger of the current model of building electrification is that it could leave low-income households on a gas grid with declining throughput and therefore rising gas rates. And so trying to get to low-income households early in the transition rather than leaving them behind, I think is a key strategy. And I think really speaks to some of the values that Sonoma County has around not just doing a transition, but doing a just transition for community members. So I was encouraged to see the strong support for that, as well as for building upgrades writ large. So I think all the comments about the scientific validity of this are absolutely accurate. This is a point in time, one meeting. The folks that can come to that meeting, but it's one piece of input, and we'll continue to collect more input through this committee, through other sources, through polling, et cetera. So thank you all for that discussion. And Tanya, would now be a good time for you to talk about the polling and how the county is planning to get some maybe more scientific?
Sure. So I could share a couple of slides from the presentation that was given to the board on Monday, if that would be helpful, maybe as part of the discussion. So I'll just put these up if I can find it here. All right, is everybody seeing that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So the board item at the RCPA board meeting earlier this week, Monday, was to start a discussion with the board on the topic of polling and request approval of an agreement or a contract with EMC Research to do the polling for us. And so we have funding from the County of Sonoma's Climate Action, Climate Resilience Fund, I believe it's called, which is from the PG&E settlement. So the county, as part of their strategic plan, also had an interest in some climate polling. And so they're actually funding this poll, but RCPA is managing it with the consultants that we've selected, which are EMC Research. So you can see on the slide here the purpose. To the points that were raised earlier, we want to do a scientifically valid survey of likely voters and really to assess the feasibility of the 2024 revenue measure. And so the design will, provide us with a representative overview of the county's voters, an assessment of how successful a climate action measure could be in 2024, and then some feedback about how we can best communicate the measure itself, what kinds of issues and language resonates with the folks that are polled. So the proposed methodology is that they'll use a multimodal approach. So there'll be email and text message invitations to a survey, and then also live phone interviews calling both landlines and cell phones. We're going to do, I'm not sure if we finalized the total number. I think it's going to be between 600 and 800 and about 15 minutes average length, and it will be done in English and Spanish. And one of the questions that came up in the board meeting was this discussion about, can we, via this survey, get some assessment of voters' preference or feelings around the type of measure, whether it's a sales tax or a parcel tax, which are the two methods that RCPA has the authority to put forward. And so and I think this will be something that a subgroup, our executive committee of the board, will be working with EMC Research to make a decision about how we do that, but they could actually split the sample and ask one subset of the sample questions related to parcel tax, and the other subset the questions about appetite for a sales tax measure. So that's how they could assess the preference for those two. So just kind of highlighting what types of questions this research will help us answer. And I should say that we're not going to be able to ask all of the detailed questions that, for example, we presented to the community at the meeting on the 19th. So one of the tasks of the RCPA's executive committee is to take all of those inputs, the poll results, the survey results from the meeting, as well as the results that we've gathered in the follow-up survey, review that, based on their own assessment of those inputs, work with the polling firm to figure out, what are the types of questions that we want to ask in this poll. And so I think it is going to be at a higher level, more trying to get a sense of what level of support is there in the community, how important is climate as an issue to the community relative to other issues. So similar to, for example, there's a poll that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission did recently, Bay Area wide, and it was trying to understand voter preferences on a range of issues, ranging from affordable housing, homelessness, the economy, jobs, climate, transportation. So they were trying to understand how, for the MTC specifically, how does transportation line up or rank relative to other Bay Area issues. And I think we'll probably do something similar with this poll. And we did that back when we did the Go Sonoma transportation, the extension of the transportation sales tax, also looked at, how does bike ped and transit and other transportation investments measure up relative to other issues that folks have in the county. But there will be, an attempt to get an understanding of the types of projects that would be most important. So I think, again, that'll be looking at the major groupings that you all have put together, and then looking at the themes and the messages that would best convey the benefits of this type of measure. So, for example, is it better to focus on the health benefits of these climate projects, or, saving money, or some combination of messages? And then this is just a brief overview of the process itself. And so this will be developed in collaboration with the executive committee of our board. I know there's been some requests to, share those questions as they're being developed with a broader group of people. And the concern in doing that, and the polling firm, and I don't think the board wants to do it either, is that we don't want to bias the results of the survey by starting to share questions, with folks in the public. And so the survey will be designed, then conducted, and the firm will analyze the results. And we anticipate having the results. I don't know if they'll be ready for hopefully they'll be ready for our July board meeting, which would be the second Monday in July, to present those results. And the board will be discussing then, what is this telling us and how do we move forward from here? So here's the high level timeline. So final presentation week of 7/10, that would be our board meeting. And so you can kind of get a sense for what needs to happen between early next week, which is when the project will kick off, and then having the final results in July. So any questions, BC or Ross, anything that you would add to that? And I should also say that if the results are encouraging and the board decides to move forward with a revenue measure, then there will be another poll done in, I think, the spring of 2024, which would then be looking more specifically at what's being considered for the expenditure plan itself and the ballot language, and really honing in on what are the issues at that point in time. Because as you know, anything, hopefully this will not happen, but if we had, say, another round of major wildfires, that could completely change how people are viewing, could increase support, could impact the types of projects that voters want to see in this measure. So that's one reason for doing a follow-up poll closer to the time when this would go on the ballot. Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking more about the exchange we had earlier after Steve's comments, and pardon me. It seems like I'm always talking or on the phone. So when Steve referred to his findings, I looked at this list and I couldn't quickly map them, which, and I've tracked down why that was. And I think it goes to the.
I'm sorry, this list meaning the poll
I
results
have it
from our.
in front of me, the list of questions, the building sector project ideas that were ranked.
Yeah.
And Steve reminded us that he was talking that the closest fit to the polling results they had in Sebastopol was the question around expand ambassador program to assist property owners with building upgrades.
Yeah.
And arguably, it's a similar question to the first ranking one, offer extra assistance. It's just a different target of who gets the assistance. So what I was reflecting on was why didn't I map that personally? And the reason I think is that word ambassador program is a kind of a special term of art. I think it's the term used for the county's program. Is that correct? Or is
BC do they use that term for their services? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. Honestly, I believe I chose the term ambassador and I chose it over the word concierge.
Exactly. And so I looked at that and went, oh, I've heard of this. This is a concierge program. And both of those terms have a certain class related connotation. And the term that I've been starting to use to talk about the on the ground concept that we need is promotoras in the context of promotoras de salud, which is the term used for public health officials that go out into communities to promote public health. COVID, it was a popular concept around COVID outreach. And so I think you're right that concierge or ambassador has been used more in the more traditional utility funded, government funded outreach programs. But particularly if we, the county really wants to do more of this outreach to more vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, maybe we kind of go with that theme and naming the assistance. That would be something I'd like you guys to talk with the survey people about, so that we don't have that disconnect when we're trying to communicate what we're asking for, because you don't want to and promotoras is probably going to be a little off-putting to some of the Anglo English-speaking audience. So just kind of put that into the mix when you're working on survey design with your experts. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I have heard them, the EMC folks, talk about the need to simplify the language and make sure that we're not using technical terms or things that might be familiar to those of us who are really active in this space, and somebody who's just your average person doesn't make any sense. So yeah.
The other thing would be in that first one, you have two concepts kind of joined together. You have extra assistance, and then you have the target population. It might be possible to sort of split them and rank who deserves the most attention, multiple populations. Elders might be in there, other vulnerable populations might be in there. And then you have your other questions, which are more on the technical measures descriptions. And then you have that feedback on what's the community most responsive to.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions or feedback on the county's polling plans? All right, pregnant pause completed. Thank you, Tanya, for that. Appreciate it. We're now going to move on to the next agenda item, which is a continued discussion on measuring project and program impacts. And our CPA is interested in these experts around this table providing any impact on tools that are available out there, tools that you've seen in order to be able to measure the impact and to help analyze things like greenhouse gas reductions from a project or a program, the cost of a program and how to analyze it and really separate out the costs to be able to have adequate comparisons, and then environmental co-benefits besides GHG, say other air pollution or environmental pollution or social benefits as well. So some of the criteria that the counties we've identified in this committee and the county has acknowledged they're interested in are seen on the agenda, timeframes, implementation costs, ongoing operational costs, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, public appeal and favorability, and social equity benefits. But wanted to open the discussion are what tools or standards besides those that you just heard about are you aware of and you think that the county should use when determining how to choose between different programmatic approaches, say between a information campaign and a incentive campaign for electrification, or choose between mitigation and adaptation efforts. What are standards that we should be using to determine which we should choose, and then any tools out there around how we can measure the effectiveness on the program and the project scale? So that's what we're hoping to talk to you all about and see if you had any advice.
I have a couple of ideas right off the bat. One of them would be just tracking, like how many, for example, if water heaters and heat pump furnaces are, emit a certain amount of CO2, from like gases and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to use. Well, number one, like how many of those have been replaced in the county because there's permits. And then number two, using the utility measurements to see, gas versus electricity usage.
Great, thank you. Amy, in your world of solar, what kind of tools do you guys use to like either project greenhouse gas savings or project future operational costs or savings? I mean, are there any good tools
I have a really
use?
I have a really good one. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Great. Any other comments, Amy?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe in a minute.
Mr. Pierce?
It seems like in terms of metrics, if we're able to get to the point of having $1 expenditure for metric ton of greenhouse gas emissions reduced, that's a fairly uniform one that other cities have looked at, and it's not an easy thing to come up with in terms of transportation or sequestration, but for buildings, we can actually determine some estimated numbers of general expenditures to electrify a building and do some weatherization work on it, and some expected reductions in therms. And the PG&E data is available for all the zip codes that for the last 10 years by quarter that show the therm use in both residential, commercial, and industrial. We can probably do a decent job of projecting if we're doing X number of units over this period of time, we could see this reduction in therms, and that equals so much in the way of greenhouse gas emissions, and what was our dollar expenditure per metric ton. I'm sure there are many more complicated ways of doing it, but I'm trying to go about kind of the more simple way of, unfortunately, the tools that are out there that I found are so high level that they become not too useful in this endeavor. They have all their calculations kind of hidden behind in their numbers that they're crunching. It'd be better if we probably create our own spreadsheets and make it visible on how we're coming up with the numbers we are presenting.
Is there a way to get data on how much gasoline is sold in?
There is a gasoline breakdown by city. The peak sales were, I think, 2017. There are quite a few cities that don't list any here because there's not enough gas stations in that city for them to do it for, just privacy reasons. But yes, that data is available.
And what about like electric car sales?
Definitely available.
Yeah, and then of course, BC's been collecting through the 3-year, inventory update.
Right.
It looks at the building energy, electric and gas that's going into the buildings and industrial sector. So I agree that we need a kind of a top-down reality check that our programs are having some impact. I have a fair amount of experience with sort of the bottom-up estimation, impact evaluation methodologies that the PUC, maybe I have a little post-traumatic stress order associated with that process. I think Pam was nodding his head. Yeah, it is a arcane world, but you really do want to kind of go there. If you're spending lots of public money, you need to have some reality check on your spending. So for me, the kinds of rules of thumb that I apply whenever I learn about a new program is I look at the dollars expended, and I look at the number of customers or buildings treated. And then I look at the size of the population of buildings in the area. So that gives you a sense of market share. How much of a market share are you impacting? Because LA might have a large number of projects treated, but a smaller community might have a small number, but the relative impact of the small program might be much greater because they've been able to treat a larger fraction of their housing population. So I like that kind of quick reality check bottom up for any program that you're rolling out. Now, to the impact estimates of how much energy you're getting out of that, or how much savings are you getting out of that? You need some data, and the utilities usually require in their rebate applications, pre and post data from that customer. Sonoma Clean Power, if they're a partner in rolling out our programs for the building sector, presumably could request that without much burden on the customer. Just be a checkbox on the application form. So I would encourage that. Is there a tool that you can dump this into? I do not recommend using the cost calculators that the utilities use. That's just too arcane and not fit to purpose here. There may be others that are more tailored to the local government space that I'm unaware of. BC, I think anything that augments your inventory process is likely to be the most easy for staff to implement. So maybe ancillary spreadsheets for the programs that are, that you're just doing reality check to the overall 3-year updates. That's how I would be inclined to structure it. But there may be other good fit for purpose tools that I'm unaware of. Who would be good to ask would be I think the RCPA has a membership in the Sustainability Directors Network. Yeah, so that's the kind of question that they should be able to give you some guidance on.
Great, thank you. What about on the adaptation side? Tools or standards out there? I mean, the mitigation side is kind of like, energy input in, pollution out, how much should it cost? What about different adaptation options? What about comparing, how much money should we put towards adaptation versus mitigation? Any kind of standards or tools that y'all are familiar with out there in the adaptation or resilience side? Any like standards, kind of like LEED, or something else on the resilience side that maybe we would use as a standard for a program?
I'm going to jump in quickly because we had this conversation in the land and water group a little bit. We were talking more in the context of how is the ultimate revenue pie going to be allocated. That's where the conversation I think started. But one of the things I think I may have said in that meeting is that this committee is way ahead in terms of measuring the impacts, right? We have energy data for mitigation. And that committee is mostly about adaptation, and it's mostly about natural methods. It's not tons of CO2 pumped into the ground by a particular sequestration industrial facility. So, which would be relatively measurable. And it's one of my, it's kind of counterintuitive epiphany for me that while natural sequestration is probably beneficial and we should be supporting it, it's almost impossible to measure with persistence from the perspective of public subsidies to natural sequestration, at least at the current state of measurement. So, and there are people who are advocating, especially in the private investment space, they're saying, look, we're never going to be able to prove to investors that they got their money's worth for investing in natural sequestration. So we should instead invest in synthetic sequestration or industrial sequestration, direct air capture and carbon capture with storage. So, that's going to be a decision that our board has to make in terms of carving that pie up and what is going to be the best use of the funds. With that section that's determined to go to adaptation, how do you spend that? In the building specific space, I think I was arguing for home hardening being included as a preparedness and adaptation expense, particularly when it's like I think now Skype, the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program does. You're allowed to do water measures, you're allowed to do earthquake measures, I think, and maybe house hardening still, is now allowed in there too. So in that sense, it's no longer just an energy program. It does have adaptation, but maybe you have to have some internal accounting that says, okay, we're not planning to spend more than 20% on adaptation or 30% or whatever the number is going to be. Those kinds of decisions, I think, should be made by the board. And I argued this during the Sierra Club's process for developing its geoengineering and carbon sequestration policy, that we should make a recommendation about what that fraction of funds should be. How much of our efforts as an organization should be toward mitigation versus adaptation. It feels to me that we have the moral hazard problem if we spend too much on adaptation but continue to pollute because we don't mitigate our emissions. So in my ethical look at this, the adaptation number never goes up above about 20% until we're making good progress on mitigation, and then adaptation becomes over time a growing fraction of the future budget stream. But that may not be what's politically popular too. So there's a lot of dimensions of this problem, but that's my thinking on it to date.
I have a question. So like I was just trying to brainstorm what are the things like that the buildings specifically, this group specifically would be adapting for climate change. And so one of them obviously would be water, like both flooding and drought. And then one would obviously be fire. Energy independence would be one. And then I added emergency like egress. I don't know what the word is for that, but basically like, you know, people being able to escape in case of
Evacuation.
Evacuation routes. Yeah, thank you. That's the word. So are there other things that like that are sort of in that adaptation bucket for buildings?
Insulation could be a
I was going
crossover,
to say that. Yeah,
both mitigation and adaptation.
I heard insulation, and then what was the other thing?
Those Tom and I were both talking about insulation.
Oh, okay, insulation. Okay, so those 5 things. So
And
then,
warming and cooling centers, that type of, it's both, it's an adaptation.
okay. So then sort of the question is how do those things get measured? Right?
Yeah, what are good metrics to measure them? Are there any standards out there? Are there any tools that we can use to measure any of these metrics or standards that already exist?
I think I want to jump in really quick. I think with just a little more context, I think we're collecting this information about tools. We don't know exactly where in the process we will be using these tools. And I
Right.
think that's part of the question, I think, we don't know whether we're gonna, for the decision that's made on what's in the revenue measure or not, I don't know how quantitative that is going to be using tools like this, or if it's going to be thinking about the mix of projects and programs within the measure, or if these are going to be more the types of tools that we are going to want to employ rather technically, say, after a revenue measure is passed and we're actually evaluating individual projects. So I just wanted to open up for that broader context to at least acknowledge that it hasn't really been determined how we're going to use these tools, other than knowing that we want to be able to quantify or be able to characterize these projects and programs as best as we can as we move forward. So,
Okay.
so with that
Well-
said, everything I've heard so far has been great, but I just want to give it the broader context, I think.
Yeah. So then like if I have 6 things written down for adaptation in like the buildings realm, and so like I would just take those one by one and say like water first. So we have like flooding and drought. So like as far as drought goes, like are there permits that are gotten to do like gray water systems and water catchment systems? Is that a permitted building upgrade?
some don't require
Sometimes.
permits. The simplest ones, I think it's washer gray water is allowable without a permit in California.
Yeah, and I'm sure Daily Axe has some, at least for the local like Petaluma area, would have some data on that. Like there's probably some, I don't know where people get the information to do gray water systems. We got ours through Daily Axe, so. But that would be data that could be collected probably. And then as far as like floodplain stuff, it seems like whatever's happening, like there's a whole neighborhood that's being built on a couple of acres behind my old house. And, you know, they actually built in a whole, because they're like right next to Adobe Creek. And so they built in like a whole, basically like a lake into the neighborhood. And so as those things are happening, I'm sure that there's like you could quantify like how many homes have been, you know, protected by those projects, or how many, you know, families, or however you want to do that. And then energy independence, that one's like probably the most obvious, because that one we kind of already talked about, like how many people are getting solar, how many people are getting batteries.
That information is available too from PG&E, and each of the utilities list all the solar installs throughout the state.
Yeah, so that one's probably the easiest one. Insulation probably is, I don't know, is insulation a permitted thing?
In
I
the
don't-
residential sector, I think probably a fraction gets permitted, but I have no idea what fraction that is. There may be a market study that the
I
CalMax has
wonder
done on it.
if there's a way to just collect from like the large vendors like Home Depot, how much is being sold.
They don't like to share that data. It's
They don't.
tricky. Usually if it's disaggregated, you can get, you know, the utilities have been able to twist arms. I used to do those studies. But it is hard to do. Yeah, so insulation is a particular technology. I think that you might be able to look at sort of national trends and then do some quick qualitative surveys of like a focus group of the local big insulation contractors. But it's not going to be much more than a fuzzy number, because
Yeah.
people buy stuff at Home Depot and put it in themselves.
Yeah,
But you might be able to survey the Home Depot managers and say, oh, well, yeah, we're numbers up this year by 10% or whatever.
Yeah.
The other problem that's occurring to me here is the disaggregation of our programmatic effects versus general background naturally occurring conservation or behavior, and or the reverse. A new, you know, the idea of everybody having an airplane to plug into their garage pops up, and suddenly we have a new electric load we hadn't thought about before. So I hope we're not moving in the direction of the county operating its own programs, Bayren operating its own programs, and the SCP operating their programs, and PG&E operating another set of programs. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So it might be that these revenue funds would be best used if they were to amplify a more regionally integrated approach. But obviously, if it's going to be public money, we have to have these, you know, this measurement question has to be at least reasonable, so that we would give those monies over to these other entities to implement. Sonoma Clean Power seems to be doing a pretty good job, at least from the customer contractor outreach side. I'm noticing that the contractors are recommending that program, those rebates for heat pumps, for example, and heat pump water heaters over the Bayren program. There's generally a lot of contractors I've spoken to are saying, oh, the Bayren program is too complicated for me to participate in. Too many things, too many hoops to jump through. I don't need to do that because I'm a busy contractor. So I don't need to participate in a program that generates lots of leads. I think Bayren has tended to move toward the bigger contractors who are, but I may be wrong about that, but that's been my qualitative assumption about what's going on between those different programs these days. Sonoma Clean Power, for example, is more relaxed about, they just want to be sure that you bought the equipment and that you got a permit to get your rebate. You don't have to have a particularly certified guy do the install. Pros and cons of that. But
Yep.
yeah.
Other tools, standards, metrics. I know BC will take your input tonight or anytime into the future as you have a shower moment. Remember your favorite accounting tool, and we'll send it to them. But anything else?
I popped a couple of metrics in there. They're nothing great, unfortunately. Most of these high level metrics are nothing that useful. So I think that we kind of need some overall strategies to funnel down this effort, and we get is to start diving into which metrics, what tools, instead of is the strategy, are we going after early retirement for low income water heaters and furnaces, knowing that 2027 the standards are kicking in for water heaters, that anyone that dies is already going to have to be replaced with an electric heat pump unless they go with gas instantaneous. And then in 2029, it's the same for heat pumps, air furnaces and air conditioners. So we have all these things that are kind of coming to us on the horizon, and choices to make on pushing an early retirement on equipment or a targeted early retirement, or do we get more bang for our buck with electric car charging infrastructure? Knowing that the building sector is going to get a big shot in the arm, both in terms of money and requirements in the not too distant future. So there's kind of basic strategies of what's our biggest bang for the buck on approaching this.
I want to pile on to Steve's comments. You know, my grandfather, the judge, always said, "Don't speak unless you have something to say." So I've been kind of sitting back and listening. I think one of the most important things to think about with a ballot initiative is to think about the marketing aspect of it. You know, this probably won't be the last ballot initiative that we'll need and want. And so in addition to the metrics that have been discussed, I think it's super important to have high profile, at least a few high profile projects that are very visible so that people can see their money being spent right in front of them. You know, if the Snoopy's Home Ice suddenly gets solar panels, that's something that they can see, and it's something that's visible and high profile. If one of the things we really talked about with Measure W, our ballot measure in LA, was we want to make sure that people are going to see these water conservation measures, and that they're going to be spread around, not just concentrated in one area, but spread around throughout Los Angeles, so that people could, it's places that people could go and physically, touch and look and see the water being conserved. And then there's educational signage is part of seeing what's happening. And so maybe that's an important component of the education component, is like, look, this money that you spent is, bought these solar panels, or bought this insulation, or bought this energy efficiency EV chargers, whatever. I think that's super important. And just to think of this whole thing as a marketing campaign, at least from one aspect. So Grandpa also said to stop talking when you're done, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Andy. BC, Tanya, anything else you'd want from this discussion? You know what you needed?
Yeah, it's been very helpful. Appreciate it very much.
Great. And
Yeah, this was very helpful for me. And as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of unsure how these fit. I will acknowledge a lot of the stats that we've talked about or were brought up here tonight. Even if I don't know how they fit in relation to this revenue measure, I'm actually think that many of them are the type of just kind of ongoing statistical, ongoing tracking that we here at RCPA should be doing in conjunction with our kind of secondary or in line with our GHG inventory. And I don't know if it was Steve or it was Tom that mentioned that, but I think we have wanted to provide some additional kind of societal, some indicator numbers that are not directly linked to the inventory, but say are leading indicators. And so I think a lot of these things like permits pulled, gallons of gasoline, things like that, those are things that we should, independent of this measure, we can determine how to start tracking and start building into kind of an ongoing dashboard, independent of whatever happens with these projects within this measure. So this is very helpful for me.
You know what, I had one more thing I was thinking about. The one metric that most people are going to be concerned about is how is it going to impact their personal pocketbook. And one of the things that interests me from the project that we're working on with refrigerants in a grocery store is if we can fund that if we don't make the grocery store pay for it and therefore raise its prices, then people are not going to see their prices go up on already escalating food prices. You know, so if there's a way to measure or solidify, you know, here's the baseline of what the cost of your energy is right now. Here's what the cost of your food, you know, here's a gallon of milk and an ear of corn. This is what they cost now, so that we measure that now. And then in the future, once we implement these things and we can sort of show the interconnectedness of these projects, and this is what it cost in the future. So it didn't go up or it stayed the same despite the progress we've made.
indeed. Any other remarks on this before we move on?
Yeah, to Andy's point, we've seen that with refrigerators, right? That refrigerators have gotten bigger and yet less costly to operate over time.
Thank you all for the input on this. Thank you for the ideas and thank you for keeping them coming. As BC said, you know, the county is still developing a whole series of different ways we could measure, slice and dice. And so it's helpful to hear from this group of experts, the ways we can be thinking about building measures. We're going to move on to announcements. Andy, you had mentioned that you wanted to make an announcement. It's an opportunity for anybody else to talk about any events or projects or announcements that are coming up. Andy, do you want to speak to yours?
Not really a full announcement, but I just wanted to say there's a small group of us that are working out how to. We want to do a pilot project with the local grocery store on swapping out the old greenhouse gas emission full refrigerants and swap in more low emission refrigerants and see if we can do that in a cost effective way that will encourage other grocery stores to do the same. And we also want to, given that I think they're all due to swap their stuff out by 2030, see if we can work on reporting on their progress toward doing so that A, we know what's going on with the grocery stores, but B, we can help them.
Great, thank you. Anybody else for the good of the order? events, announcements?
Anyone's going to the Zero Waste Symposium tomorrow, I'll see them there.
Great. Let's make a couple updates. So last week, state of New York became the first state in the country to require all electric construction for all new buildings being built in the state, starting with buildings under 7 stories in 2026 and all other buildings at the end of the decade. So Washington had required that for water heating and space heating, but not for cooking equipment. But so New York's the first to do all electric. And then it looks like the state has released guidelines for its equitable building decarbonization program. This is a program that last year had $600 million, almost $700 million allocated to it for a direct install program for low-income households across California. And so the Energy Commission has just released last week the guidelines, the draft guidelines for the program, and they're expected to be trying to get the money out in the late fall or winter. And their hope is that if the Department of Energy allows enough flexibility in the rebate programs from the Inflation Reduction Act, this program would be the vehicle for getting at least some of the IRA money out the door as well, to try to make it a streamlined program process. I have very little faith in the Department of Energy to do that, so we may see a collection of programs. Those are the only announcements or updates for me.
Well, on a cheerier note, I'll invite you all to Jack London State Park on May 20th. Pretty much all day, like 10-ish to 3-ish. The Snow Mountain Preservation is hosting a bunch of photographers and kids-friendly events to just do wildlife photography, and Land Trust will be speaking. Number of speakers are lined up as well. Should be just a fun day to go to the park.
Wonderful. And one more announcement. Today, the California Air Resources Board had a workshop on their the first workshop opening up a rulemaking for a 2030 phase out date for the sale of emitting appliances for water heating and space heating. And so this is a rule that they would be adopting around 2025 that would require by 2030 all water heating and space heating equipment sold in the state be zero emissions. And so that kicked off today. With that, our CPA staff, could you speak to what's at the bottom of the first page of the agenda about the Buildings Committee pausing meetings until after polling results?
Sure, I can jump in here. So we have had a kind of a small but mighty group that's been meeting for the last few months on these Wednesday evenings. So I do appreciate that. But we, given our conversation earlier about going out to polling, we really think this is an appropriate time for us to kind of pause and the committee meetings. And we're going to kind of do this with all 3 of our committee meetings. We're going to work with the pollster, get the polling done, get the results together, and then we would be working with Panama and with Ann to kind of start these meetings and call another meeting sometime. I'm guessing it would be in late July or sometime in August, depending upon schedules and summer availability. We are continuing to aim towards a kind of end of the year deadline of really culminating the work of this committee. But we really think that taking a pause for a couple of months while we get the polling figured out makes the most sense. So, Tanya, I don't know if you had any kind of other context you wanted to add there.
No, I guess the only other thing I would add, BC, that staff will be working on is, I think this committee had given us feedback in a previous meeting about additional stakeholders that we should be involving in the process. And so we are reaching out and trying to set up meetings with some of those individuals and groups to make sure that they're at least aware of what we're working on, give them an update, and invite their participation in the process. So we'll be working on that also in the meantime.
Wonderful. Thank you. So watch your inboxes for updates. And I'll repeat BC's thanks to all of you for spending your evening with us and all the input you provided over the past few months. It's going to be really valuable in the polling efforts and as we think through programmatic design and project design. So hope you come back after the brief hiatus. All right. Thank you all.
Thank
Very good.
See you
you.
all.
you.
Night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good night.